Afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the final session of the day. In this, at least, when you look at the outline of the schedule, at least this looks like it has the most potential to, now I don't know how you guys are going to do over here, but it has the most potential to provide academics and practitioners an understanding of what one can provide and what the other demands. I think that one important reason why there have not been more partnerships in this area is because there's a misunderstanding between what practitioners actually want or demand and what academics are actually supplying. And when I've gone out now for the last decade or so talking to practitioners and fundraisers, I sort of hear a lot of different stories about what they want, and it's hard to articulate exactly what they demand. But nevertheless, it is quite heterogeneous and it's quite surprising in some cases. So when thinking about the program, we thought it made a lot of sense just to get a few people in front of the room. Even though there are people in front of the room, I also want people from the audience to let us know their thoughts and feelings. And I thought this could be a very useful bridge, a conversation that created a bridge between academics and practitioners. So how I want to run this panel is I want to give each panel member 3 to 5 minutes to talk about who they are, what they do, and if they want to pose a question, it's fine. If they want to just give a summary about, look, I'm practitioner Joe, and what we really need is this, and we can begin a conversation. So I want this to be flexible. I want this to be a good dialogue between not only the audience and the panel, the audience and other audience members as well, and between the panel members. Okay, so I'm going to start now. We'll just go right down the line here with Ivan from Northwestern, and I'll turn the floor over to him.
Great, thank you. Thank you. Again, it's an honor to be here, certainly. And again, my name is Ivan Adamus, or I was born Ivan, so thank you for, my mom would be very proud that you say that. So,
always good to go old school.
I appreciate it. That's what it's about here. So, again, I'm an executive director of schools and programs at Northwestern. So what that means is I essentially lead about 7 teams of fundraisers for Northwestern. A wonderful job. It's the full team is about 250 full-time employees in all of what they call advancement at Northwestern, so it's quite sizable. You know, my entire career has been in higher education, and the last 15 have been sort of in frontline fundraising, both in the U.S. and for purposes of this group. Also spent some time in the U.K. at Imperial College in London. Go Chelsea. Also worth mentioning, before I was at Northwestern, I had the great privilege of also working at Johns Hopkins University and Johns Hopkins Medicine, which is a unique role. I was essentially the international fundraiser for Johns Hopkins. I mentioned that because it gave me great perspective on not only alumni parent fundraising, but also the grateful patient activity, which was really interesting, and certainly being global around that, it was fascinating. I'm also been very actively involved in our professional association called CASE, Council for Advancement and Support of Education. It's among the largest types of organizations of its type, and represents about 3,600 colleges, universities, along with primary and secondary independent schools. And they are in 76 countries, and they have offices in London, in DC, Singapore, and Mexico City. So it has about 70,000 members, and I share that with you because it's, for you researchers, there's a lot of potential partnerships there. And, you know, so CASE is obviously, if you're interested in sort of higher education or education fundraising, you know, this is really an invitation for us to continue conversations, and let me know how I can help. Also, I've been involved with the Association of Healthcare Philanthropy, which also serves primarily the hospital health space. So that's a group that also very active, and I think would be very interested in the types of work that you're interested in that also. And then some of my colleagues here may speak much better to this, is the Association of Fundraising Professionals, AFP, which also has a strong following, and I think many members of us practitioners are part of that. So just again, just give you a little context of my experience, and I feel privileged to certainly be here. So.
Thank you very much. Next up is the birthday boy, Grant Gilbert from WWF and AFP.
Thank you very much, John. It's a pleasure to be here, and you know, it's funny because I told my wife this year. I said I really don't want to do anything for my birthday. It's a hectic travel schedule, and it turns out this is probably the largest fete I've ever had. So thank you all for the happy birthday song. I'm really wearing two hats here today. First and foremost, I'm an employee of the World Wildlife Fund. I'm the Senior Director for the Central Region. I have only been in this role for 6 months, so there's my caveat in terms of any specifics that I may not have a complete handle on. But what I do essentially as the Senior Director is I deal with major gifts fundraising. So I'm dealing with individuals who are giving anywhere between $25,000 per year up well past $1 million. It's a job that requires a lot of face time. It's a job that requires a lot of travel. I and a soon-to-be staff of 3 manage 23 states throughout the large central swath of the U.S. But it's an honor to work for the world's largest conservation organization. We have operations in over 100 countries around the world, and I'm very proud to be a panda. The other hat, that's what we call ourselves, by the way, in case you missed that. Yes. WWF employees are proudly known as pandas. So the other hat that I'm wearing is I am the current president of AFP Chicago. This is the Association of Fundraising Professionals, and I'm honored to be the president of the Chicago chapter. We are the largest chapter in the United States, and as you might assume, our focus is on the advancement and education of ethical fundraisers in the business. So that's also quite a big job. You know, I want to talk a little bit, and I know that we'll get into this later on, but it's about the art versus science of fundraising. It's a term we always mention. And frankly, on the major gifts side, it is a lot more art than it is science. I'm speaking from experience outside of higher ed or healthcare, which I think are different animals to a degree. But certainly in the conservation arena, we are nowhere near as scientific as my colleague here in higher ed. So a lot of what I'm doing is dealing with those major donors. We're dealing with relationships, and it would be absolutely wonderful if I could start putting some rigorous scientific methodology behind the practice, because right now we're really just relying on anecdotes and best practices. Thank you.
Thanks, Grant. That was very good. Next up is Jim Rosenberg from the Jewish United Fund.
Great, thank you, and pleasure to be here. So, and it's not my birthday today, but happy birthday to you in July. So Jewish United Fund, Jewish Federation of Metropolitan Chicago. Let me tell you a bit about us. First of all, I serve as the chief of staff of the organization. I've been in this position for about 18 months, so I'm wearing my other hat, actually, which was I worked in development and campaign with Federation JUF for the past 12, 13 years before taking on this role. And as many of you know, when you're working in philanthropy and working in donations and campaign, you can't leave. It's all about relationships. So though I'm not doing everyday, day-to-day fundraising work, I still have it in the back of my mind. It's still part of my everyday portfolio, but just not consuming all my time. But we are driven in terms of our fundraising, and therefore it's always on my mind because it's on the mind of our executive. So we've been around for 113 years. We're the largest social service network in the state of Illinois, one of the largest nonprofits in Illinois. There's about 155 local federations throughout North America serving the Jewish communities throughout North America. And we are, after New York, which is the largest, we're the second largest. And we basically serve as a central planning, fundraising, and coordinating body for the network of agencies in Chicago that serve both the Jewish community and non-Jewish community. So our services are for the general community as well. We basically do two things. We help those in need and build community, and we do that through a variety of ways, through direct social services, through education, leadership development, volunteerism, anything that gets people connected, feeling a connection to their community, and ultimately making a gift as well. We work with, it's basically cradle to grave in terms of our approach and what our agencies are doing. So how do we do this? We raise a lot of money. We start off every year needing to start a new campaign, and each year we raise about $80 million annually. That's local, from local donors, from about 30,000 donors. The lowest gift is $1, the highest gift is $2.6 million, and this is on an annual gift. In addition, we also have several $100 million in endowments, because we have a whole planned giving structure that we work on as well, strategic philanthropy. But it's done through a variety of ways, which we'll talk about and present some opportunities for thinking about research, but through our volunteers, through professionals, through our events, through face-to-face, direct mail, online, phone-a-thons, social media, and also people just giving on their own. And we haven't really spoken about this, but a lot of people are not necessarily responding to direct solicitations. They're just kind of giving on their own. That's what they do because they've connected with our organization, other organizations as well. And our goal at the end of the day is to raise the money, because we take the money in and then we push it out to the services that are needed. But at the end of the day, as I said earlier, it's all about engaging. And one of the things that I think is interesting is that the notion of connecting people to giving, yes, at the end of the day, we need people to make their gifts, but also we want people to feel a connection to the organization. And we spoke in the other room about investing in next generation folks in the 20s and 30s who may not have the capacity to make the large gift now, but make the larger gift later. That's what it's all about, is setting it up and teeing it up for something that might happen in the future. So that's kind of what we're about. During this conference and ahead of time, I thought about a number of research questions, and I think I doubled or tripled the list sitting in the other session, so looking forward to sharing some of that.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. Thanks, Jim. Next up is David Riley, who is from the academic side, even though he is currently working at Google. David, go ahead.
Thank you for that recognition, John. I'm gonna claim to have three hats, in fact, because while, as John says, I think of myself as an academic, I am now working for Google. And on top of that, I am the president of a nonprofit that does about $200,000 a year in fundraising for the Pennsylvania Governor's School for the Sciences. I'm thrilled we were able to bring that school back to life after it had gone defunct for 5 years due to state budget cuts. So I try to put some of what we've learned into practice.
I understand you gave 199,000 of the 200,000, but congratulations on your new not-for-profit. He's also independently wealthy. That's why I'm just joking.
That is an exaggeration, but but as you pointed out, Google stock price is up 10% today.
Exactly.
So.
Big day for David today. His warrants and call options are doing well.
I have been passionate about the use of field experiments for a really long time, dating back to when I was in graduate school, and I spent 2 years of my PhD program collecting data on advertising and marketing in the pharmaceutical industry. And after 2 years of collecting this data set, I became convinced that the data that I had painstakingly collected and cleaned up could not answer any of the questions that I was interested in. And what I crusade against now is the thought that big data is going to answer all of our questions. It doesn't matter how much data you have if you don't have the right kind of data. And so that's what we're really in the business of at this conference, I think, is figuring out how do we generate the right kind of data that can answer our questions. So I spent 11 years being a professor, and then got this strange opportunity to go work for Yahoo Research 6 years ago. And there I was actually able to study the question that I had been unable to answer in graduate school. How does advertising actually impact sales? And the way I was able to do it was by running experiments with 1 million people in them, seeing whether they purchase more whenever we put them in the treatment group that sees an ad campaign. And so we've been making slow progress at that topic, first at Yahoo, now at Google. the kinds of things that I'm interested in for commercial advertising are very relevant to nonprofit fundraisers. What actually gets people's attention, what influences behavior, and so, you know, right now I'm thinking a lot about YouTube and how do video creatives attract people's attention. I think it's really cool that we have the opportunity to, you know, make a video, upload it to YouTube, and, you know, buy $100 worth of advertising in a day and then see how does it work, right? That's the thing that I am currently most excited about. I also want to point out that Google, for those who haven't noticed it, Google does have a program for nonprofits that gives you free advertising. So if you haven't found out about it and you want to know about it, please come talk to me. It's possible that we can even design an experiment so that you can figure out how well is this working for you. I have also been thinking a lot lately about the economics of attention. And by this I mean what we're all engaged in is you know, trying to get people a very scarce resource, which is people's attention. I think about how many charitable solicitations I throw away every day without opening them, and how many ads I ignore every time I'm online. And I'm really interested in the question of what, you know, how can we get the right messages to the right people and then not flood them so much that they have to develop strategies to learn to ignore you. And so one topic that I'm really curious about right now is how is it possible for us to get people to pay attention to our messages if we do fewer of them? And I know that it's true that if we repeatedly message people that we're more likely to get their attention. So you know, that's already goes in the, that already violates the hypothesis that I'm making, but what I have in mind is there are some people, here's what I get ticked off about. My favorite charities solicit me repeatedly, even after I've already given this year, and what I've finally decided that I have to do to manage my attention is, my favorite charities, I'm only giving to you in December. That's it. Because when you say, hey, we need you to renew in March, I go, well, crap, when did I give? How much am I actually giving this year to this charity? And so I can't handle it anymore, and I've decided I throw out all the crap until December when I sit down and decide how much am I giving to each charity. So I'm wondering, you know, are there strategies that we can adopt for people like me so that we're not wasting so much money trying to message them, and can we encourage people to get into you know, repeat giving? I know we all love it whenever donors sign up for, you know, charge my credit card each month. Can we then stop wasting money on mailing them whenever they're doing that, and so on. So those are some of the topics I'm interested in. But you know, I want to just emphasize I'm really thrilled by the ability to do controlled experiments so that we, you know, try multiple strategies and find out what actually works. So in this attention situation, I'm wanting to crank down the number of messages on a set of people and see how do we do long term with them compared to the set of people who are getting the standard number of messages.
Okay, that's great. Thank you very much, David. And last but not least is Catherine Eckel from Texas A&M University, who has also been working on the economics of charity for several years. Catherine, go ahead.
Thank you, John. My name's Catherine Eckel, and I'm a professor at Texas A&M, where I have the Sarah and John Lindsay Professorship in the Liberal Arts. So, and I'm director of the Behavioral Economics and Policy program there. I came late to experiments in my career, but that was still early in most of your careers. I started doing experimental research in the late '80s, and I was really interested in how people were much nicer to each other and did things like giving to charity and giving to each other when our economic models didn't predict it. Of course, we've gotten all beyond that now. Nobody really worries about the fact that economic models predict that people will be selfish anymore. So, one of my early results was to show that women give more than men in a controlled experiment, and this got me into Glamour magazine. Just to give you another example, I have a recent result on giving by the poor. So we're studying a low-income neighborhood in Dallas, a low-income, mostly African-American neighborhood in Dallas, and we have some experimental data on their giving to local organizations that provide services to the neighborhood. And there's a result in the literature that if you prime people about belonging to a group, then they give more to that group. But what we have in this data is that if you prime people about their membership in this neighborhood, which is not a good neighborhood, they give less. So priming is not always the key to happiness, but that's just another example of one of the papers that we've done. So I've done quite a lot of work using lab experiments to look at various things. But in addition, I have a few projects that have something to do with fundraising. I spent a while looking at different incentives to give. So I was very interested in whether it mattered if you match somebody's contribution, if it matters where that match comes from. And we spent some time comparing matching to rebates. So if you look at the current federal tax system, what we have is a system for subsidizing charitable contributions that's based on rebates. So you give money to a charity, you file your taxes, and you get a refund, right? And what we were able to show in our experiments is that if you replace that with a budget that's used to match contributions, more money goes to the charity. So I don't think we're going to be able to change tax policy, but it would be fun if we did. We've that'd be a good experiment, wouldn't it? Yeah. So we've partnered with various charitable organizations doing this incentive work. So including NPR and Lutheran Social Services and University A and University B and University C. For the University of Texas at Dallas, we designed a senior challenge program. They didn't have one, and they haven't continued it, even though it was quite successful. Who can understand what people do? Another thing that I'm really interested in is targeting. So if you, as a donor, have control over how your contribution is used, are you more likely to give, and will you give more? And if so, how much more likely, and how much more will you give? So that's something that we've been working on in the lab. So we do lab experiments where the money actually goes to a charity. So it's sort of like a cross between an artificial lab experiment and a real decision that somebody might make. My current projects, I'm really interested in the relationship between people's motives for giving and how they're affected by incentives. So sometimes incentives might make people more likely to give, and sometimes it might make them less likely to give. So there's people in this room who have important results on that topic. And so people's reactions are heterogeneous, and I'm really interested in trying to characterize the heterogeneity so that we can do a better job of tailoring fundraising strategies to the right people. So it's a little bit like what David was talking about, getting the right information to the right people, right? And not too much of it. So my colleague, John Meir, and David Herberich are working with the Texas A&M fundraising folks, and we're looking at gifts and targeting in that setting too. I'll tell you a story about that in a second. I'm also interested in the dynamics of fundraising strategies. So if you do something in one time period, how does that affect giving down the road? It's also true that when somebody innovates in a fundraising strategy, lots of other organizations copy it. Do you remember the beginning of address labels? So it used to be nobody sent you address labels in the mail, and then suddenly everyone was sending you address labels in the mail, and now they've kind of petered off again. But the first people to send you address labels in the mail must have been very successful in raising money as a result. So I think it doesn't work now. So that kind of dynamic pattern of innovation in fundraising strategies, how they spread through different organizations and kind of run out of steam in the end. So John asked me to say a thing or two about working with organizations. And there's one thing that I'm a little puzzled about. Sometimes it's awfully hard to get a charitable organization to work with us. So we have money, we have ideas, we want to test things. It's like they're scared of us. Do you think we're scary? You know, we have to get our work approved by the IRB. We can't do anything really dangerous. I think that the fear might be that we'll make a mistake and that they'll lose their ability to raise funds forever. Do you think that's true? Anyway, there's just so much promise in working with fundraising organizations. The combination of access to data and the ability to test things in a controlled experimental way. I think that both sides can really learn a lot, even though we have different motives for trying to figure out the answer to the questions. We had a great experience working with NPR. Of course, NPR does experiments all the time. You can hear it on the air when they do, right? So they're accustomed to doing experiments, and we really had a wonderful time working with them. On the other hand, my colleague John Muir and I, well, working with our local fundraising organization, we sent out, what was it, John, 50,000 emails this summer? 75,000. We got back 28 responses? 28 responses. So interestingly, the amount donated in the control group and the treatment group were exactly the same. Sometimes things don't work out exactly the way you want to, but we've been really pleased working with Texas A&M. They also run experiments all the time. They seem delighted to have us in the room, helping them brainstorm new ideas for ways to raise money for the university. And it's just working out really well. So when it works well, it works really well. And I'll stop now. And I'm really hoping to get your ideas and questions about things that we can do together.
Okay, that was wonderful, Catherine. Thank you very much. Now let's set some ground rules. No one up here sitting or down in the audience actually knows the questions that I will ask. Okay, so in fact, 20 minutes ago, I did not know the questions that I was going to ask. So I can promise you that these are not fixed questions, and I'm setting people up. My first question I'm going to throw to the practitioners, and after they respond, if anyone in the audience wants to say a few words, you're welcome to. I'm just going to start with the title of today's event here, the panel discussion. What do practitioners actually demand? Let's just go right to the question. What do you want from academics? And the second part of that question is, what are the barriers that you see that we need to overcome to supply what you demand?
Want to take a shot?
Sure, I'd be happy to. You know, John, I would say that demand is a strong word. I would.
Not to us.
I think you can guess where these came from. This is Econ 101. We have a market, and we have the buyers, the demanders, and we have the sellers, the suppliers. That's why I said demand and supply. So it's a kind of a play on Econ 101
So if you're
stuff.
not an
Grant.
economist, we just mean want.
You know, I would say, John, that I would demand or welcome any information I can that you can provide me with that proves that the best practices that we employ are effective. Now, the issue in my case, and you touched on this when you presented to us last week at the AFP conference, is that it's much easier to test, obviously, on lower level donors. You're testing mailing strategies. When you get to the higher level donors, you're dealing with individuals who all have varied personalities. And you also noted, John, that there is a lot of hesitancy on the part of nonprofits to share those donors and to quote unquote experiment on them. So you know, most of the questions that I have in terms of what I would like to see deal with those major donors. The problem is, but really this is your problem, how you would go about constructing tests for them. So.
Okay, so one point that we have on the board here is I demand to know more about your strategy for working together to convince high-capacity donors to give and stay committed to our cause. that be a proper way to state your demand?
Yes, that would.
Excellent. Duly noted.
Let me just state the obvious. So as a fundraiser, I am judged by how much I raise for my institution. So whatever you all can do to make my job easier, sign me up. And so that's why I'm here today. One, to begin some partnerships with as many of you as I can gather, and don't overcharge me, and I'll certainly work with you. But that really is, at the core, it's my responsibility and my obligation to my institution is to be able to find ways that allow us as an institution to put forth our best case for support and be able to ultimately close as large a gift as possible. Again, stating just facts, at least from our case survey that I work with is, and all of you fundraisers know this, about 10% of the donors are about 94% of the dollars. So, or even more specific, the top 1% of donors are about 83% of the dollars. So I think most of us up here as practitioners are squarely focused on making sure that we stay disciplined to work with those top donors. I think, I can tell you that we've had multiple meetings on deciding what color birthday card we send to this particular donor, and I think they would be surprised how much effort and how many decisions need to be coordinated, including the font size, to be able to make sure that person feels happy to have received this particular piece of correspondence. So again, other parts are important, and particularly in the higher ed space. Obviously the USA Today does factor the alumni giving. They see that as a proxy to student satisfaction, and so many higher education leaders, admittedly or not, and chancellors, presidents, they say, we don't really care about rankings, but guess what? If you do really well and you pop up a couple extra percentage points on alumni giving, sure enough, in the state of the university, they usually bring that up. So it is important, and it is something we think about. I have a colleague here, Amy Traubman, who thinks about that every waking day in terms of figuring out how do we move the needle to be able to, again, allow more people to make a gift to the institution, no matter what size. So just some thoughts.
Thank you. Jim? Go ahead.
Well, jumping to barriers, I think one of the barriers is really explaining how the research can actually make a difference. I mean, yes, there's collaboration to put together research and get published and have folks get together and talk about it, present it, but without the proper translation to the nonprofit about how it can make a difference or support your core values, it's kind of this divide, this gap that exists. I think what I would ask for is figuring out which of all our questions really are testable and can make sense. So I'll rattle off a couple here,
Sure.
just to kind of get into the weeds a little bit more. We're a pledge-based campaign, so we count our campaign as we get pledges, and we end up collecting about 98% of the dollars pledged within 2 years. So it works for us. But we have a number of donors at the low end, and we're very top-heavy also. And we run, I look at it as two campaigns: the dollar campaign and everyone else, the community campaign. So what about the lower end? How they're in and out of the campaign, and why are they going in and out of the campaign? Why are they priors 1 year and come back the next year? What's going on in their head? Why do they come back after 3 years? And how can we do a better job of keeping them in? How can we sync up their giving cycle with our giving cycle? So if a donor pledges $100 and doesn't pay in 2013, but next year in 2014 pays that $100 pledge, but we haven't gotten a pledge for that person for 2014, we say, can you give a gift of $100, give, pledge, whatever? And they say, but I gave you $100. No, you were paying for last year. We're out of sync with them. And so how do we sync that up and make sure that their cycles equal our cycle? How do we nudge to pledge? How do we get the nudge to pledge? What's the tipping point? How do we get them to pull the trigger on making a pledge? Also, what about pace? In our last session in the other room with mostly practitioners, we talked about, the 50% rule. Is it better to talk about what you've achieved or what you have yet to achieve? But what about this notion of pace? So right now we happen to be $3 million ahead of our pace from where it was last year. We're looking at our donors and say, you made a gift by this time last year, made a pledge, okay? Why we'd like you to make your pledge now. You did it before, we have to catch up. But what are we supposed to share with people? How do we share that the notion of being ahead? Is that a good thing or is that not a good thing? And it relates to the question of, do donors want to be associated with a winning organization, or do they want to be associated with an organization that needs their help? that's cash-strapped and kind of a smaller nonprofit. So that's out there. Moving donors up the giving ladder. Our needs versus the donors' needs. How do we bring those together? The small donor's perception that their gift really makes a difference. You know, in an $80 million campaign, the $250 donor, yeah, really, why? Why should I make that gift? And you have to we have to figure it out. The role of rankings, Charity Navigator, and there was just a piece in Chronicle the other day, being pretty critical of Charity Navigator. And for us, a couple of years ago, we raised some special money during an emergency time in Israel, and we added about $36 million to our total. But the next year, we didn't have that emergency, and we raised $36 million less. Well, guess what? Our star ranking went down from 4 to 3. It doesn't make any sense, but testing the perception of rankings that donors have, and if it matters or not, I think is really interesting. And the last one I would say is this notion of turning volunteers into donors. We have a tremendous volunteer program in our agencies and in the community, and a lot of them are saying, you know, I'm giving my time, that's what I want to do. Now, to be sure, a lot of them are donors, but there's a chunk that are not. What is about their giving of their time that prevents them from also making a gift? Why do they see it a disconnect and also almost like an insult that we would ask for a donation as opposed to giving of time? So helping figure out, those are just some teasers of some questions, but also helping figure out which are the ones that you can test versus the ones that just go with your gut and figure out how to handle them.
Absolutely. So those are 3 very, very reasoned responses. I appreciate that. I will throw it out to the audience if a few practitioners want to jump in right now and add to what was said about what do practitioners demand. Please go ahead and speak as loudly as you can. Excellent. Thanks, Edith.
Thank you. From the perspective of a very small practitioner, an agency that brings in 500,000 and hopes to one day soon bring in 1 million, I think that all these ideas, we've been jotting down ideas all day, but I think our demand perhaps is what can we do with a part-time, what's the best use, what's the best thing that we could do with a 20-hour-a-week fundraiser? What do we do with that? And how then can we grow from there? Everything's about scale, scale. It kind of scares us small practitioners, right?
Absolutely.
So I think some thought as to what our best use of time would be helpful.
Great. Anyone else in the audience want to add to what practitioners demand? Go ahead, sir. Go ahead.
So I'm a different sort of practitioner as far as I'm a government official, right? So sorry about that. Not this country, though.
Yeah, so I thought you guys were shut down, so you're back in action?
Yeah, no.
Okay, very good.
We never stop in where I'm from. What we would...
Let us send you some Republicans.
We see Republican means something else to us. Sorry, the thing which I would direct at you, but also to sort of other academics generally, is around tax incentives and tax reform. There's a great deal of evidence about matching and rebates. It's not, I know there's not a consistent line on it because the answers are inconsistent. However, whenever we're currently trying to reform our system. Whenever I talk to academics about it, what I hear every time is, this is something we can't go near as a policy area because we don't have the answer.
Wait, can you directly pose what we can't go near in a question? Is it, do people respond to marginal rates of taxation? Is that the question?
No, sorry. So there is a sort of vague answer on that.
Well, there's a huge literature on that. Look, and I think the best way to answer that is to look back. 1975, Marty Feldstein started working on this. Charles Clotfelter has worked on it for years. And I think we have a lot of good estimates of price and income elasticities, not using experiments, but using naturally occurring data.
Sorry, I am aware of that literature. It's around what do we do now in order to make it better. So we are trying to reform this. You have a rebate system in this country. We have in your country. Sorry, we have a match system.
Is that the gift aid?
Yeah, gift exactly. But we're looking to change that quite dramatically. It might be possible to do something, not quite obviously field experiment, but something. And so what we would request gently is for academics who are willing to work with us to try and come up with things which are possible to test.
Absolutely.
So so new things, not what have we done so far.
Right. Okay, very good. Very good.
Love to.
Okay, so let's, well, you're going to get your chance, Catherine, here. So now let's go to the second part of the title of the panel discussion. What can academics supply, and especially in light of what we've heard of some vector of demands from some smart people. I'm going to start with David, and hopefully you can answer for us, what can academics actually supply? If you need a few hours to prepare your lecture notes, we'll go on to Catherine if you'd like. I hope this question didn't trick you up. It was actually the title of the panel.
John and I go back a long way. Okay, so what can we supply? We can we can help supply more rigorous thinking in a lot of cases, right? So one thing that I've gotten very good at over the years is learning how to tell stories for why the inference you're trying to make from your data might not actually be the right inference to make. You know, a great example was a book that apparently, a story that actually made it into your book, if I understand correctly, although I haven't had a chance to read it yet. There was a firm that claimed that they knew how their advertising affected their sales. And they knew because they looked at their past data and essentially plotted all the data and fit the best fit line, you know, plot advertising on the x-axis and sales on the y-axis and do a big scatter plot, you get an upward sloping curve. You can get your computer to compute the best fit line, figure out what the slope is, and okay, so we know that, you know, that our TV advertising works much better than our print advertising, so we should do more TV advertising. And the thing that we can do as academics is ask, well, what kind of data were you using? And in particular, how did your data vary? How did you know how much advertising, how much sales you were getting when you advertised less, and how much sales you were getting when you advertised more? And they said, well, you know, generally we don't vary our advertising. Well, heck, if you don't vary your advertising, you're going to be able to do a scatter plot with one point on it. And I can fit a lot of different slopes through this line. And what I want to know is how much does my sales go up with my advertising? I really need to have at least 2 different points in order to measure the slope of my line. So how did it vary? Oh, well, you know, actually it turns out we do advertise more in December than we do the rest of the year. Okay, so what were they doing? They were assuming implicitly, and they didn't realize that they were making this assumption, that had we not advertised in December, we would have had just the same amount of sales in December that we do the rest of the year. Right? That any increase in sales from November to December must have been due to the increased advertising. And in most commercial, you know, most consumer product categories, that's not true, right? You're making an assumption that is just horribly violated. And so what we're really good at is noticing where you can accidentally make I mean, it's really easy to make this mistake. I make this mistake a lot myself. But what I've done over the years is train myself not to make this mistake as often. And the thing we really want to do is advertise different amounts, you know, at the same time, essentially, right? If we can advertise more in California than we do in Massachusetts or whatever, you know, increase our advertising in California and decrease it in Massachusetts, then we have a better hope of being able to measure the effects. And what I really like working in the IT industry is that we can often randomize things at the individual level. So, you know, different people in the same town are actually going to get different treatments, but then I can still measure were you more likely to visit the website and make a donation. So I'm going to say that's something that we really can offer. And so when you ask these questions, the first thing I start doing is trying to figure out, okay, how could I generate data that might actually be able to answer your question? I know that's what Catherine's doing as well. So
Thank you, David. So go ahead, Catherine.
Probably.
What can academics supply?
Well, you know, David's exactly right. I would just add a little bit to that. So we're all So a lot of the people in this room, I'm almost embarrassed to be the one saying it, but we know a lot about experimental design, and so we're pretty good at taking a research question and designing an experiment that will give you the answer. So avoiding confounds like the Christmas rush, making sure you have a small enough number of treatments so that you have a large enough sample size so that you can actually say something. That's the biggest mistake. The two big mistakes people make in designing their own experiments is that they have too many treatments, so they don't have enough sample size in any one treatment to be able to say very much. And the other is that they forget about the control group. You have to have a control group. Oh, sorry, there's a third one too, which is failure to randomize. That is a bias in how you allocate people to treatments. So we're just pretty good at that. We have a lot of practice, and so if there's a question that you want the answer to, we can help you design an experiment to do it. I also want to put in a plug for lab experiments. So field experiments are great. You can answer a lot of questions with field experiments. They're also really expensive, and sometimes they can be expensive, and if you make a mistake, they're hard to recover. It's hard to recover from a mistake. So often you can use lab experiments in conjunction with field experiments. So to answer questions before you go into the field about calibrating your treatments, or to answer questions when you come back from the field and you want to know, why did this treatment do this? Is there something about it that we can understand better in the lab? It's really useful to take those two methodologies together and try to tackle the answer to a question.
John, can I add one more demand
Absolutely.
since I'm warming to your request?
Sure, absolutely.
I think that one of our demands, and it's a problem for, I think, researchers, is that we don't want to be distracted in our work, and we want it fast. And when a researcher, when the idea comes for a research project, it's all well and good to sit here and think about that, but back in the office, we've got dozens of donors calling constantly. We've got events yesterday, today, and tomorrow. We've got reports to file. We've got meetings that are taking place. We've got needs to get marketing stuff out, everything like. And then you think, well, how can I take a pause and either dedicate myself or a staff member to? And it's like bringing in a consultant. You have to staff the consultant. How do we take a step back and do that, and not either wait for it or feel like it's taking me away from other work that needs to get done? Because in the world of fundraising, it's fast, everything that we're doing, and that's actually a self-criticism. We don't take a step back and say, what could we do better? But there's one thing about taking an all-day retreat and sitting back and thinking about ideas that you can have. It's another thing of saying, well, let me create a random sample and a study and a control group. I picked up these terms, although I was a psychology undergrad, so I get it. And figuring all this stuff out, and then satisfying us, but also satisfying the process that you have to go through.
Absolutely.
That's a really, really good point.
So thanks, Jim. And Catherine, were you done?
Yeah.
Okay, super. So I can throw it out to the audience if some academics would like to take a shot at what can academics supply. Uri, go ahead.
So I think that we are mixing the tools with the goals, right? Running field experiments is not the goal. The goal is to raise more money. Field experiments are one tool that we have, but if we look at big donors, for example, we know something about behavior. We know something about the psychology of things. Over there, we can help. You mentioned the time, right? We need to do it fast. We need to do it tomorrow. Sometimes you cannot afford yourself to have a few treatments, but you can have one behavior change and maybe measure it relative to last year or something like that. So, the best we can do is a field experiment, controlled field experiment with everything that we need. But that's not the only thing that we can do.
So I think what Uri hints at there is important. When I so I'll make the point in a quick story, because I know everyone's impatient, Jim. So whenever I talk to a for-profit or a not-for-profit firm for the first time, what you realize is one thing: every firm has a mountain and mountain and mountain of data that they currently have on hand. And very few people know exactly what to do with those data. So I think about this problem in two different ways. One, do you have data on hand that we could use that can help you learn about not only small capacity donors, but also large capacity donors. In many cases, you do have data on hand. You just weren't sure how to use it or beat it up. And then after that, you come to certain questions that your mounds and mounds of data cannot give you firm answers to. And then you set up this research agenda that allows you to complement your mounds and mounds of data with field or lab experiments. And when I first got started in this area, the question that I was going after, and I went after with David Riley, was if I need to put together a bunch of money for a capital project, how much should I gather in private before I go public with my call for funds? And when we looked in the literature in the late 90s, there were a ton of anecdotes out there about what you should actually gather in private. Fundraising school says 20 to 50%. Fundraising strategists say it's 43%. Some people say 33%. And you would ask them, where are you getting those insights from? And in many cases, if not every case, it was a rule of thumb, it was a boss, or it was exactly how we've done that in the past.
That's what everybody else does.
And that put together, and that's not a criticism of this industry at all. It's exactly true for just about every for-profit firm as well. So what we did is we put together a research agenda about how you can use results to build on new results that answer the question, if I have upfront money, how should I use that upfront money to learn about using it the most efficiently or effectively? From seed money, it goes to matching grants. From a 1-to-1 match, it would go to a 2-to-1 versus 3-to-1 match. From there, it would go to, well, what about a 1-to-3, 1-to-2 versus 1-to-1? From there, it would go to, what if we use the upfront money for small gifts? What if those gifts are conditional or unconditional? What if we use those monies to buy lottery prizes? And as you can see, this sets aside this very important question of, we have a research agenda. What we're after is how to use upfront money, and then the results have a natural way to build on past results. And in the end of the day, you have something that you've learned about in a practical sense. How do you use upfront money? But in an academic sense, we learn about, why do people give? What keeps people committed to a cause? So I think that sort of picks up on Uri's point that indeed it's a naturally occurring data, lab and field experiments, but also it's a model to, here's exactly how you should build on your data, and here's exactly how you can use your data. I think that's what an academic can supply in an important way. So Glenn, you also had your hand up. Why don't you go ahead, and then Richard, I'm going to go to you, and then I'm going to go to my next question.
I had two questions connected by the one theme, and that is, this is a theme about balancing supply and demand, or at least talking about supply and demand. But it seems to be an undercurrent here that we're doing this at a price of zero. And that's what concerns me a little bit. The first question that comes from that is the mounds of data that exists seems to be perfectly well handled in other settings by marketing science. I've made this comment earlier, and frankly, most of the suggestions I've heard, they're nothing to do with economics, they're just behavioral marketing. They're saying you're trying to flog a can of soup, you're trying to get people to contribute to something X. If we can trick them with this, or we can frame it this way, or we can add that, all of them are perfectly sensible suggestions, but there's no deep theory behind them. They're just, so let's try this, let's try that. But people do that all the time in stores. They randomize, they look at scanner data, they handle big data. Sorry, David, I agree with you about the aversion to the term, but that's being done. You pay for it. So the skill sets in looking at that, you pay for it. So if you don't want to pay for it, that's fine. But if you do want to pay for it, there's plenty of people who do that. The second question I've got is maybe more for the academics. What I heard David suggest was, what we can supply is for $1.50, I'll buy you a pair of die, and you could just roll it yourself. What I heard Catherine suggest quite correctly is for $30, go out and buy a Principles of Experimental Design book, or take a class online. And between us, the skill sets in doing those, particularly for a lot of the sorts of small donor things that we're talking about, are not that deep. Now, yes, you're busy, you'll have to hire someone to do it, but we're not talking about rocket science. We're not usually even talking about experiments in any complicated sense. They're very, very, very simple things to do. So my concern is that we're trying to clear this market at a price of zero, and that may be an honourable, good thing to do. I don't think it is, but my question is, why don't we just spend money and do it the way that other people are doing it, by buying the experts that know how to solve these problems?
Can I just, I know, I'm sorry, I'm cutting into your time, and I apologize, but just really quick, one thing I would love to see, and I mentioned this earlier, is this idea of tools that perhaps the academics can help us in philanthropy world to be able to build where, irregardless of perhaps size of organization, that as you point out, that there are costs around this, and there are consultants and all that stuff, and frankly, that's only a few large organizations can perhaps afford that. So the idea of thinking carefully about the kinds of tools and toolkits that you all can provide that perhaps are free or minimal cost would be a huge win, and perhaps something to aspire to, perhaps even as an outgrowth of this of SPI's work, is to think about something we can go on the website and download and say, here's something that's been created by academics with considerations for the practitioners as a way to get some answers that really drive philanthropy. So just put that out there.
Yeah, I want to comment a bit about market clearing prices. I think you're defining prices much too narrowly. I think when you look at what I've been doing since 1998 is I've never received a pecuniary payment from a charity. My payment has always been, if we work together in partnership, I can then use those data, and you are providing me with a list of 4 million people who we talk about the idea, we then implement the idea, for example, through a mail solicitation. So the firm is doing that work, and it ends up, what is the cost? It's my opportunity cost of time. It's the firm's opportunity cost of time, and that market has worked pretty efficiently. And I would guess that there are dozens of academics who would line up to say, look, I want to work in the economics of charity, and I want to do field experiments, except that I don't have connections. My payment needs to be academic papers. Let's face it, that's our currency. That's the most important currency to young academics, no doubt. So when you were mentioning speed, I thought that's an assistant professor. That's not John List, because John List won't be speed. Glenn's been waiting on me for 6 years to write 2 chapters in our field experiments book, and they have not been written, right? So it's clear that there is a market, and the market clearing price is zero, but there are non-pecuniary payments. Firms are giving their time, they're giving some staff, they're working together to make sure the randomization is right, and the academic is providing time and effort, and then a report at the end, which looks like an academic paper, and then a way to build on those results. Let's go to Richard.
So, I've been struggling in another context since the mid-'80s at the Association for Research on Nonprofit Organizations and Voluntary Action, where we have academics and we've talked about similar things. And a couple of comments. Number one, there are some inherent conflicts in that the academic wants to know what will help me raise more money for my organization and doesn't care about the societal consequences. Maybe it will come from another needy nonprofit so much. And so the academic who tries to address questions that are too peculiar that way, too specific to fundraising for one type of situation, then they're called that their research isn't generalizable and they don't publish. So you have to be sensitive to where's the intersection between stuff that will help you without helping your rivals, so that the academics and the practitioners can all be happy with it. The second thing is, I've heard very strongly from many people, and I heard from you, but I'm going to emphasize it a little differently, that too many people in all sectors of society are so busy meeting today's needs that they don't think about how they could make life easier for themselves in the future. And essentially, that's what I hear you say, okay, I got 5 minutes, tell me how I can raise more money. And that, what you have to say is, I might lose some donors today if I take today off, but you have to have the attitude of investing in the long term.
Yeah,
And the turnover in the market for fundraising fights against that long-term
100%.
approach.
Yeah, I think what's happening is that the feeling among nonprofits is that it's a risk for them to kind of take a pause.
And it is a risk, but it's also a risk to not take a pause.
Of course, of course, and I think that so I put the challenge out to the academic community, to research, to help educate the nonprofit world of the value of that, so that those of us who are believers who are here get it, but convincing colleagues that this is worthy is a challenge, and so we need that help with that.
So that was my third point, was addressing that. Yes, it has to be, the academics have to understand that perspective and see what to do. So I have two ideas from what I'm hearing. One is that offering executive education in research methods for nonprofit executives might be a market that ought to be created. And two is creating a users group, a research users group in the nonprofit sector, where researchers can chime in, oh, that's already been studied in this obscure journal in this discipline that other people don't know about. Might be very productive, and it might be productive for academics to participate because they'll occasionally learn of a project that hasn't been done that is really interesting, or learn of a new caveat for the study they've published.
We hope that is spyhub.org. Okay, so the next, so thanks a lot. The next question back here from another academic. Right back here, Justin, there you go.
Do you have a listserv yet for that?
Yeah, absolutely we do.
So, a word of caution and a suggestion. Of course, we're all competing for the same dollar. And even in large communities like Chicago, the amount of dollars available for contributions is limited. So, given this collective budget constraint, I think it would be useful to think in terms of experimentation, field experiments, of a longer period experiment where adjustments in the budget allocation of dollars for contributions can be made, both across organizations and within the same organization. So when I get called, we need money from you by organization A urgently, then I give it in January instead of giving it in December, but it's the same budget. Okay, so in an experiment, it would be regarded as a success. We got Avner to donate in a certain amount of money, $500, but they did not change my total amount of contribution. So I think it would be useful to design an experiment that first goes over a long period of time and sees whether there are certain treatments or certain inducements that do increase total amount for one organization or just change its allocation over time. And second, whether it's just shifting from one organization that uses particular inducements or to others.
So we know of two such studies that are currently in progress that attempt to do that. Not only look at intertemporal substitution that you're talking about, but inter-charity substitution. So I think it's fair to say that the empirical evidence is zero. We don't know if the pie gets larger when the mousetraps get better. The neoclassical model might suggest that they should. Say Thaler's mental accounting model might suggest that it's just all stealing from each other. I think there's no empirical evidence that I know of that answers that question. We are attempting to do that right now. Go ahead.
I think another aspect here is, to the extent that we figure out how the questions are formed and what some of the answers are, we'll try to find out what other literatures might be relevant. The example I have in mind is that I don't know for sure, is it the case that the incentive to give to a charity is very closely related to the incentive to not avoid or evade taxes? If we think that there's some relationship there, there's just a huge literature, and there's a huge amount of data, since governments get to collect data that charities don't necessarily get to collect, on the relationships between various sorts of incentives and the degree of tax evasion or avoidance. Just a real quick one that I can mention in about a minute. Pomeranian and Schneider have a very interesting paper where they looked at tax evasion in Switzerland by looking at the data from national income accounts and the data of total amount taxes people revealed. And they found that in cantons where it was only the group of the whole canton that had the authority to spend the money, so you had direct representation in the appropriations process, tax evasion was just dramatically lower than the ones that had representative government. So, just one quick example, there's just so much in that literature that potentially would be relevant if we think that these two incentives are sufficiently similar.
So, Ron, we do have a little bit of evidence that's kind of related to that. So, my colleagues and I have been working on voluntary giving to government. And so we have these experiments where people can give to a private foundation that does cancer research, or to the government branch that funds cancer research. And what we're finding is that the people who are willing to give to one cause, to one manifestation of a cause, one organization that supports a particular cause, are willing to give to the other one too. And the amounts that they give are not very different. So it might be a little bit more or a little bit less depending on their perceptions of the effectiveness of the organization in using the funds. But it does seem to be true that the people's giving is cause-based, and it doesn't have a lot to do with, so someone who has an impulse to give to a charitable organization that does X will also have the same impulse to give to a government, to pay voluntary taxes, essentially, to a government organization to do the same thing. Does that make sense?
I wanted to follow up on something that Glenn said a minute ago, or a little while ago. I think that I just wanted to say that I mistrust some of the marketing experts, most of the marketing experts who claim to be able to measure stuff for you and tell you answers, because I have now spent 6 years in the advertising industry, and every time that I have tried to drill down to the level of detail that I need in order to satisfy my inner scientist about whether we understand the answer to something, I have found that the studies that I've looked at were, houses of cards. And what I've noticed is the private sector doesn't rely on peer review the way the academic scientific community does. And the fact that we all review each other's work in the academic world really raises the level of research a lot, right? And so I've seen examples where some big marketing firm says, oh, we've measured the effectiveness of this ad campaign and it's this. And I ask, well, how did you do that? And sometimes I uncover a mistake on the order of the one that I just described, where you can't measure the slope of a line through one point, and you might not want to assume that December is the same as every other month of the year. And sometimes they just won't tell me, and so then I really don't think I should believe their results. If they can't tell me what their method was, oh no, that's proprietary, we can't tell you how we did that. So I just want to urge this community to get into a mode of sharing information and examining, being with a community of researchers who are going to be critical of each other's results. Because like I said, I've been at this 6 years and I still have a very hard time believing any result that I've been given in the commercial advertising world. So if I would really like to see this community get on a much firmer footing and be able to believe things. It's not good enough to believe a result just because some expert told you. Right? We've got to have some kind of review process so that we know that we're getting real scientific results.
Okay, thanks a lot, David. So I want to go to my second question. We have about an hour left, I believe, Edie. And I want to throw this back to the practitioners. We've had a discussion amongst academics now for the last several minutes. So for academics, the biggest threat is when they begin a relationship with a nonprofit, that the person who they have developed a relationship with is soon gone. And this happens in the for-profit world. This was mentioned earlier about, and I'm trying to look into turnover amongst the folks who execute nonprofits and who have the decision-making authority to lead an organization to run a field experiment. So the worst possible outcome for an assistant professor who's working really, really hard to get tenure is to design a dozen experiments for you, and then for you to quit 2 weeks before, or sometimes in some of my cases, an hour before we're actually going to go live. The guy gets sent to the office in Nicaragua, for example. It could be causal, absolutely could be causal. But I think the biggest threat to the supply side, especially amongst academics who are willing to work hard and work at your beck and call, is this assurance that something will get done, and in the end of the day, I'm going to get my payment. Because when you have risk-averse people who the next publication might determine their livelihoods, it's very, very important to have something in place that will allow them to continue the experiment that they designed in the right way. So I'd like to hear some comments, and that's great. I love it that their hands are shooting up. So you wanna let him go? You guys want to take a shot, or do you want to?
Just really quick. Part of the reason, again, not only do I represent Northwestern, but I represent CASE, Council for Advancement and Supportive Education, and so, again, just as a suggestion, John, and I really would open to perhaps, even if organizations had different folks in it, that perhaps the professional associations in partnership with you may, one, give you bigger data, two, give you more opportunities to be able to find common organizations that might share similar missions and stuff, and ultimately larger data sets for you to play with, that I think might give you, more continuity in those relationships, where I think that's, I wrote down that, there's been 71 known billion-dollar-plus campaigns. That's a lot of great data that I'm sure someone out there is really interested in diving in, and really the best organization to manage that with would be like someone like CASE. And I'm sure equivalently an AFP or a number of other ones might be able to help broker, may be able to make introductions so as to start thinking about those kinds of partnerships, because at the end of the day, again, that sorts of partnerships is going to create real value for us as practitioners. So just as an offer, I think we really would be open to further dialogue around that.
Great.
Yeah, John, we don't have an answer for you. I mean, it's a huge issue in our sector, and there was actually a study by a group called Compass Point that came out in February or March of this past year that caused quite a bit of stir in the fundraising community. But basically what it did was affirm that what we all knew, which was that supply outstrips demand, and that there was significant fundraising turnover throughout our profession. And it also dealt with some of the issues and concerns as to why. And mostly what some of the findings are showing is that there is a tremendous disconnect between expectations for fundraisers as they come into positions and their ability to perform. There's a number of ways that we can address this. A lot of it has to do with CEO understanding and education, board member understanding. But I would say that anything that you can do to help us address this issue would be greatly appreciated.
Okay, so let me add just one suggestion, then we'll either go to Jim or out here. So one idea would be for you to write a contract in which you said, if we do not run this set of experiments, we will give your research group a donation if we end up losing our person. and you end up spending a ton of time, we will end up transferring a small donation of money so you can use that money to run other experiments, and that's in payment for your time. If you do actually run the experiments, then of course there will be no payment because your payment will come in the form of data. That's one example. I'm not sure if anyone would go for that, but if you really want to put your money where your mouths are, and I've had dozens of projects cut off at the very end, it would have been nice to have a small financial payment that I could then use for other field experiments.
That's a great idea.
I think it was a great study, by the way. Everyone here should read it, whether or not you're a practitioner or not. It's called Underdeveloped, I think. And it talked a lot about the culture of philanthropy, if I recall, and whether or not the high-performing organizations had a sense of a culture of philanthropy. John, to answer your question, I think one route of kind of attacking the issue is not relying less, but equally relying on the relationship that a researcher has with the institution, as opposed to an individual at the institution, at the organization. Because if that institution embraces that relationship with the researcher, and it's part of what they're doing, kind of their values, and something that they're, just like they're going to run a campaign or run an event or plan for what the needs are for whatever they're doing, if it's also something that they know that that's what they're doing and they're invested in, if by chance a staff member, a fundraiser, some executive leaves, there's someone there that's on board, that's ready to go, that's embracing it, and it's not attached to that individual that goes off to Nicaragua.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Go ahead.
Yeah, that's all right. Yeah, just to add to that, and I don't disagree with you, there are a couple ways to go, either through the development committee, the executive team, and I mean the board, which would cut the contract with you so you're responsible to them, not to the individual fundraisers, or to go to places like the community trust or some of the big foundations who would actually, put up a bond in terms of a grant, which they wouldn't have to pay unless it didn't come through. But they're as interested in this information as we are, I believe. And I know all of us would prefer to take that money and put it in our pocket, but this is a valuable asset we would be acquiring, and I think many of the big foundations would be willing to finance, a contract to make that work. So.
John,
go ahead,
if I may. This also gets back to the earlier subject of capacity and what David was talking about in terms of nonprofit management's ability and willingness to engage you in long-term relationships. So any evidence that you can show us that helps inform our donors that information on overhead is a good thing rather than a negative would be amazingly helpful. I mean, I have to have conversations with donors, and I make a point of saying that, in the for-profit sector, no one is ever penalized for investing in their future. But in the nonprofit sector, we're looked askance at doing so. So if you researchers out there can help us address that question and give us better answers to deal with our donors, that would be greatly appreciated.
When I was raising money for my school, I had one of my alumni donors say to me, "What's your overhead rate?" And I said, "Well, it's like, I don't know, 200% so far because we haven't raised enough money to actually spend any money yet." Right there, right? It's infinite. It amazed me that is so in the culture to worry about the overhead rate.
If you're worried about your overhead, you fire all of your fundraisers and you hire one great grant writer,
or just hire all bad people. Just hire all bad people and pay them low wages. It's another way, right? So let's end on that note.
That's your recommendation.
I think I'm 15 minutes over, and the people in charge are saying, "Cut it off, cut it off." I think this is a wonderful beginning to a conversation that needs to continue. And I hope Edie will actually bring to fruition the people who demand what academics can provide with the people who are supplying, because I know there are a ton of academics just waiting to develop partnerships. And I think EDI is a great clearinghouse for these partnerships with spyhub.org, the great matchmaker. The great matchmaker, exactly.
You're a great matchmaker, I know, but...
Yeah, that's right, that's right. Yeah,
I would be happy to be a matchmaker.
so I think that that's a good start. I want to thank the panel for just wonderful remarks and deep reflections about this sector. Thank you very much, panel. And I want to thank the audience. I mean, you've been going pretty strong since what? Many of you boarded the bus at 8 a.m. this morning, and I've heard nothing but great, you might be exhausted, but we're just getting started. We're just getting started here. I've just heard great remarks and great optimism that we are beginning this scientific revolution that will make a real difference. And I think that these are the beginning steps for spyhub.org, and I'm really glad to have everybody on board. And I look forward to a great dinner. I don't know if Steve is here right now, but Steve will end up, I believe, giving just a great and fantastic talk tonight at dinner. So I want to thank the audience again for sticking with us all day. Thanks for your great remarks. And I will see you at dinner.